Today, we're starting a brand new project. We've got a 2007 JK Wrangler that we're going to turn into the Jeep that should have come from the factory. We're dumping the underpowered 200-horse 3.8-liter V6 and wedging in a 345-horse 5.7-liter V8 Hemi. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, today we start on a brand new project. Now, you've seen us work on Jeeps before, and for very good reason. These vehicles make a great dual-purpose rig, and with select modifications, you can drastically improve the appearance as well as the function of a Jeep.
Now, these JKs came out in '07. And the oldest ones are becoming quite affordable. In fact, we picked up this clean '07 with 93,000 miles on it for just under 15 grand. And so far, it's nice and clean and unabused, but we need to work on making it better. Now, underneath the hood is a 3.8-liter V6 making 202 horsepower, but only 237 pounds of torque. And while that might be fine for a stock Jeep on stock-size tires, well, once you add a bumper and a winch, larger tires, some body armor, and maybe a tire carrier, well, it quickly becomes a burden for this somewhat underpowered engine. Not to mention, performance and fuel economy really suffer. But before we condemn this thing completely, let's take it for a quick road test and see how she does.
And the road test actually was quick as long as we were going downhill. All kidding aside, the thing did what it was supposed to do on the highway and handled okay on the corners and got itself out of its own way. So while it was still completely stock, we thought we'd give it a 0 to 60 test. Now keep in mind, this is a casual stopwatch, non-scientific test, and it got us from 0 to 60 in round about 10 seconds. The 60 to 0 braking test was actually pretty impressive and a little dramatic with a short wheelbase.
Feels like it's going to stand on the front bumper.
Now, we didn't even bother to take it off-road with the tiny all-season street tires on it. We figured there's plenty of time to get it unstuck with it lifted and a little more juice in it.
Now, back in the shop with the Jeep on the lift, we can take a closer look at the underside. Now, for a rear axle, it's no more Dana 35 weak rear axles. This is the Dana 44. It's got disc brakes and some decent aftermarket support. Now, up front is a Dana 30 axle with 373 gears, obviously just like the rear. Now, this is an okay axle, and it's got some aftermarket support. And you can get one of these things to live underneath a lightly modified Jeep as long as you don't run tires that are too big or expected to be bulletproof. Now, for a transfer case, we've got an NP241 with a 272 to 1 low range ratio. And one of the good things about Jeeps, well, they're made to go off-road. And skid plates protect some of the hard parts.
Now, even though we didn't wheel this Jeep, performance was, to use Ryan's words, it was okay. The braking test actually worked out pretty good, but at the end of the day, it's still a 3.8 V6 with about 200 horsepower and about 200 foot-pounds of torque. Not bad for a stock vehicle, but once you start loading it up with bumper weight, winches, wheels and tires, suspension components, things like that, it starts to rob power because it's just flat out heavier. You can buy some of that back with gearing, but it's still a stock output. Now, there are forced induction kits, there's turbochargers, root-style blowers for that 3.8, but at the end of the day, there's no replacement for displacement, and there's no better way to increase displacement than a V8 swap. There's no better V8 swap than a late model Hemi. Now, this is obviously a junkyard swap out, and it comes from a 2008 full-size 1500 series Dodge Ram pickup. That's a four-wheel drive version. This 5.7 Hemi kicks out 345 horse and 400 foot-pounds of torque from the factory. And since our Jeep's in '07, this engine's in '08, we're in compliance as far as emissions devices go. Now, the '09 and up Hemis, well, they come with about 390 horsepower, variable cam timing, but they're a little more expensive. Since we wanted to go with a bit of a budget-friendly approach, we decided to go this route, and we picked this entire engine up for about $1,700 and about another $400 for the transmission. Now, this is a 545 RFE automatic overdrive transmission. It's a 5-speed with a pretty tall overdrive, which is one of the reasons late model V8s get such great gas mileage. Now, since this engine came with this transmission in the truck, it's the same computer that operates both of them, so we don't need a standalone transmission controller. No electronic hoops to jump through, and it's not going to be a huge deal to mate it up to the factory transfer case, making this engine and transmission package perfect for our little JK.
Now, teardown is fairly straightforward. There's just a lot of it. so you may want to snap off a few digital pictures so you can reference them in the future. After removing the battery and the fuse block and disconnecting a few electrical connections, I was able to wrestle out the battery box.
Victory.
Now, before we got started doing any of this teardown, we took the Jeep to a service station that had an AC evacuation machine and had them remove all the refrigerant from the air conditioning system. When we're done with the conversion, we'll take it back over there and have them charge it up. Now, pretty much everything in front of the engine has to come out so it can be removed. But we're not removing everything. You take the power steering pump off and just set it to the side.
Stay with the body.
And with the Jeep up in the air, we were able to start removing skid plates and drive shafts so we could ultimately remove the transfer case and pull the engine and transmission as a unit. And after supporting the transmission, we were able to remove the cross member and the exhaust system. So at least the catalytic converters anyway. Now make sure you keep track of all this hardware because a lot of it gets reused. The muffler and tailpipe was in pretty good condition and I was able to remove it with a little bit of spray lube. With the rear drive shaft out of the way, I was able to remove the 6 nuts retaining the transfer case and wrestle it to the ground.
I ate my Cheerios this morning, so.
I'm going to temporarily reinstall the cross member.
That way the transmission can rest on this. Get this thing back down and rip that engine out.
Up next, we'll get the old V6 out. And later, we'll get the new V8 in. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Well, we're in the middle of pulling out a 3.8 liter V6 in favor of a much better 5.7 liter V8. Now luckily, this Wrangler's pretty easy to work on and disassembly is fairly straightforward. Once you get the radiator and AC condenser out of the way, well, the rest of the grill comes out, you've got access to just about everything. And when pulling an engine, especially a late model engine, I always seem to forget one ground strap or wiring connection or something like that. So it pays to be extra diligent to make sure everything's disconnected. We're not at the junkyard here. We don't have the luxury of just being able to rip the engine out and not worrying about it. Plus, you never know if you're going to need to reuse all of this stuff. So take your time, go little by little, and eventually it'll come out.
Free. Ready?
By attaching 2 chains to the outlets of the exhaust manifolds, the engine and trans combo balanced out pretty well, and we were able to pull this thing without damage. Which is a good thing, because you might be able to find somebody that needs to replace their blown 3.8, and you can make a little bit of money back.
Used engine for sale.
We also pulled the original 3.8 liter PCM so it can go with the engine and engine harness. Then it's time for a little surgery, because you've got to cut off both engine mounts from the frame. You can do this in a number of different ways. You can use a grinder with a cutoff wheel on it, an oxyacetylene torch, or our chosen method, a plasma cutter. Now by cutting it in half and basically bending the metal back and forth and fatiguing it at the weld, it's going to leave behind as least amount of metal to clean up as possible.
All right. Very minimal grinding to do.
On the bottom of the mounts, we were able to get an angle grinder in and attack the weld directly. That way we could cut the weld in half and then work on the metal and break it free. Now grinding is necessary, but it's one of my least favorite things to do, so I just try to minimize it. Now I've seen guys just leave the rough, jagged plasma cut edges behind and not worry about it. It's a trail rig after all. But in our case, well, we want to do the job right. And the new engine mounts are going to have to sit on the frame where this old engine mount was. So we need a flat spot to work off of. Now my eye and face protection may seem like a little bit of overkill, but I've gotten a couple of metal slivers in my eyes and well, it's no fun. So a little bit of overkill is okay with me. And here you can see how little weld is left to grind down, which we're making quick work of with our 4.5-inch angle grinder from Matco and an Industrial Depot flap wheel. All right, now the V8 conversion we're doing moves the location of our transfer case, changing the length requirements for both the front and rear drive shafts. But if you wheel a JK with a lift kit and oversized tires and wheels, well, upgrading your drive shafts may be something you want to do anyway. JK shafts aren't exactly known for being bulletproof, and here's why. It's this CV, or constant velocity joint, at both ends of the rear drive shaft and at the transfer case end of the front drive shaft. What happens is, on extreme angles, the boot tears, the lubrication and grease comes whipping out, and you have joint failure. So what we wanted to do was take a second, disassemble one of these things and see what's going on inside there. After removing the end caps and cleaning out some of the grease, you can get a good look at the joint and also locate the circlip that holds the joint to the end of the spline shaft. With that out of the way, the joint slips right off. All right, you can see that the drive shaft is splined just like an axle shaft, and this is the whole joint right here. Basically just pivots around the drive shaft. You can see it's not much more than giant ball bearings in a cage that help distribute the power evenly. But you can see why lubrication would be so critical in a joint like this. Not to mention, they don't like a ton of horsepower being pumped through them, especially at angles. So if you've got a JK, you may want to invest in some drive shafts.
After the break, we'll wire up and drop in our Hemi. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now we're just about ready to install our new to us Hemi once we get the engine mounts welded in place. Now when we picked up our Hemi, it did have an engine wiring harness attached to it, but typical junkyard fashion, well, they just hacked the harness in two just to make removal of the engine that much easier. No big deal. We've got a new aftermarket engine harness that came with a swap kit from Hotwire Auto. And it looks like a lot, but it's really not a big deal. It plugs directly into the PCM. We've got a few individual wire connections to make, but the rest of it is plug and play, factory style, and clearly labeled connectors. Now we could install that harness after we install the engine, but then you just have to lean over the fender and the front end, so we're gonna do it right now. Well, it's a little easier. One of the most intimidating things about doing a late model engine swap is the electronics. But when somebody else has already done the engineering and all the figuring for you and makes it plug and play, well, it makes swaps for guys like you and me possible. Now, there's a lot of connections to make. You've got 8 coil packs and 8 injectors and a bunch of other stuff to hook up. But the harness lays out nicely, it's easy to figure out where things go, and it's kind of hard to screw up. Now, on the front of the engine, don't forget the kind of hard to reach cam sensor and the oil pressure and temp sensors. Now to install our new engine, we're going to be using a Hemi swap kit from Jeep Speed Shop. They've done their fair share of conversions, and their swap kit is pretty reasonably priced. Some of the stuff it includes, there's a fuse and battery box, new engine isolators, a transmission mount adapter, things like a shift cable adapter, a power steering bracket, new oil filter adapter, and a power steering line to go from our new pump to the JK steering box. We've got a piece for the air box, and we've got new engine mounts that weld onto the frame. These things are good for both Hemi-style engines and LS-style GM engines. So if you want to go with an LS, well, they'll work for that too. We also picked up a new PCM. It'll plug right in, and it's already been programmed for our vehicle's VIN number and the correct mileage. We also went with an optional aluminum radiator and shroud combo to help cool our new V8 off. All right, now like we mentioned, these frame mounts work with both Hemi-style engines and LS engines. The Hemi slot is the rear, the LS is the front, and they both line up off this index hole in the frame. All right, that'll be good for test fit this engine, make sure we're in good shape before we fully weld it in. Now, I could have gone straight to burning the engine mounts in completely, but it doesn't take that long or that much effort to give a quick test fit, and make sure everything's where it needs to be. Our overhead crane is doing a great job of supporting the engine from the top side, but I'm also using a floor jack underneath the transmission pan to help level things out and guide the transmission into place. Needs to clear that rear cross member. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop, where we're in the middle of our JK drivetrain upgrade test fit. All right, cross member's located. You're done with this. All right, I can wrestle those mounts in there somehow. We'll be in good shape. Actually got plenty of room. The engine isolators came in our Jeep Speed swap kit, and they've got to be installed after the engine's kind of floating in its approximate position. They bolt right to the side of the block and rest on the frame mounts with a through bolt. And we tried to install it with the engine mounts already in place, and it just wasn't going to happen. Now ultimately, we're going to end up using the bottom hole for the through bolt. We're just using the top hole for now. There it is. All right, now our new engine and trans combo is sitting down in between the frame rails, and it looks like it fits like a glove, like it should be there from the factory. But obviously, we still have a lot of work to do. I've got to burn in the engine mounts, make a bunch of wiring connections, and spend some time doing things like hooking up air conditioning and power steering, along with a handful of other things. But so far, we're off to a great start, replacing our 202 horsepower V6 with a 345 horsepower V8.
Today, we're putting the final touches on the Hemi swap in our 2007 JK Wrangler. We're reinstalling the drivetrain, adding a new exhaust, and putting all the pieces back in place so we can fire up our 345 horse 5.7 liter V8 Hemi.
Hey, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, this 93 Chevy pickup is really shaping up, and it's just about done, kind of winding down on the project. And so far, we're really happy with the way this thing has been transformed from a mild up, just a worn out pickup truck to a very presentable and very cool looking daily driver. With almost everything done, there's a couple little details that we wanted to address, one of them being paint. And I wanted to show you guys a detail that you can do that's going to lift this paint job from just a respray to a full-on custom job for a fraction of the financial and time investment that you would think went into it.
All right, now before Kevin gets his paint gun out, we've got some work to do here on the shop on our JK Hemi swap. Last time you guys saw this thing, we had the engine and trans sitting in between the frame rails for a test fit. Since then, we've had a chance to fully weld in the engine mounts, get them all painted up, and well, this engine and trans is in there to stay. And that means we've got a bunch of work to do to get it up and running, hooking up things like power steering, the AC lines, finishing up this wiring, getting a radiator in here so we can finish up the engine bay, and we've got to hang a transfer case off the back of the transmission and get an exhaust system installed. So hopefully by the end of the day, we can hear how our new Hemi sounds. Now we've got a lot of work to do, so we're going to be moving through it pretty quickly. The first thing we're doing is hanging the stock transfer case off of the back of the swapped-in truck transmission, and it bolts right up. Then the T-case shift cable bracket gets installed, which is hard to get to.
Thank goodness for ratcheting wrenches.
So this bracket was part of the kit. The transfer case shifter cable slides right in. Then we can install the transmission mount adapter to the back of the transmission. This will allow us to reuse the original transmission mount assembly. The rubber isolators on ours were in good shape, so we have no problem reusing it. Then we install the transmission adapter plate that goes on top of the cross member. Then reinstalled the factory cross member and tightened everything down. Then the support plate that goes on the bottom of the transmission cross member. Since the mount is moved back off the cross member, it helps provide a little bit of support.
This is the exhaust system we're using on our JK Hemi swap. And although it's not part of the kit, it did come from Jeep Speed Shop. It offers a bolt-on solution from the manifolds down, which is pretty trick. And since it does require fore and aft O2 sensors that are original style with the connections, we're going to go ahead and reuse the ones from the JK that came off of it since the mileage was low enough and it wasn't throwing any codes. The way we think, if it's not broke, let's not replace it. There's a solution that Matco offers where you're not going to round off the flats on your O2 sensors, and it makes short work out of pulling these things out and even putting them back in and not over torquing.
Now for heater hoses, rather than replace the entire section or the full length of hose, what we're going to do is going to keep a portion of the factory hose because it's molded and fits nicely around the cylinder head. So we're just going to splice into it using 5/8 heater hose from the parts store. We also swapped out a couple of noisy idler pulleys, replaced the belt tensioner, installed a new oil filter, and a new serpentine belt. We're going to be running a mechanical fan. Now the factory battery box or tray gets replaced with this steel version that came with our swap kit. But this one holds 2 batteries. The installation is pretty straightforward, but a little cumbersome because you're dealing with the wire harness, all these connectors, and well, it just takes a few tries to make sure everything lines up correctly and all the connectors and wires will fit underneath the fuse box once you get it in place. And the nice thing is, all this wiring, well, it plugs right in. There's no splicing, looking for key-on power, or adding relays. It's pretty slick. Just don't forget to reattach the factory fuse panel power supply. You won't be going anywhere. Now to get our power steering system up and running, we use the JK reservoir, a relocation bracket from the swap kit, modified JK feed and return lines, and the supplied power steering pressure line. And it worked out pretty well. All right, next up, we're going to install the fuel adapter line that came in our Jeep Speed Shop swap kit and the evaporative emissions line that came on our JK from the factory. Now, this line uses factory-style connectors, and it'll plug right in. Now, if you guys remember, we use this DEI heat shield sleeve to protect the wiring harness when we cut off the original engine mounts. Well, now we're going to use it to provide some heat shielding and a little bit of abrasion resistance to our new fuel line.
Up next, it's time to fire up our Hemi.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech, where we're prepping for the installation of our exhaust system on our Hemi swapped Wrangler. And that means trimming a little bit of metal off the upper control arm brackets to make room. Now the exhaust system downpipes were supplied by Jeep Speed Shop, and it's a worthwhile investment. If you had to fabricate this exhaust system by hand, fit underneath here and along the cross member, you'd have some serious time invested because there's a lot of parts under here. Obstacle course. There we go. And once you've got the front half of the exhaust system positioned where you want it, well, then you can snug down the connections at the manifolds, along with plugging in the O2 sensors both before and after the converters. Then you can reinstall the factory skid plates. Now, even though we've moved the transfer case back about 4 inches, well, the factory skid plate is still going to work and offer some protection. Pretty nice how that worked out. And with the Jeep back on the ground, we installed the evaporative emissions purge valve on our battery box, reattached the electrical connector, and plug in the lines.
Just use a piece of vacuum tube.
The other end of this hose gets attached to an unused port on the intake manifold. Then we can get to work reassembling the front end of this thing, starting with the radiator support and plugging in the headlights. Once that's loosely in position, then we can move on to the radiator and AC condenser. I wanted to install them as an assembly, so I went ahead and bolted them together. It's a lot easier to do it outside of the vehicle than it is to try to wrestle them in place individually. Now this is a nice aluminum radiator and you don't want to mess it up getting it into position. Now speaking of radiators, there's guys that say you can get away with using a stock radiator on a Hemi swap JK. There's also guys that say if you use a stock radiator, you're going to have overheating issues. So we erred on the side of caution and went for the radiator upgrade, because we don't want to have to dial it back while we're out having fun in our new V8 powered Wrangler because of an overheating issue. Now, the radiator hoses were part of the kit, and I did have to temporarily relocate or move to the side the power steering reservoir so I could get the hose in place. Then all we've got left to do to finish up the front end is add the grill. All right, now we've got our AC lines plumbed, we've got the intake plenum on, we've got all the fluids topped off, and we've got a Duralast battery in our dual battery tray. We'll worry about the second battery later. And we've also gone ahead and cycled the key a few times to prime the fuel system and check for leaks. And I think at this point, we're ready to fire this thing up and see how it sounds. KT, go for it. Nice. Nice and quiet. Up here, give it a couple of blips. All right, that's good. All right, now it sounds really good, albeit a bit loud, so let's get a muffler on this thing. Now, the exhaust system we picked up when we got our V8 swap kit was complete from the manifolds to the tailpipe, but we wanted to install a Gibson muffler. The problem is we no longer had a stock exhaust configuration, so we ended up going with a Gibson 3-inch stainless steel universal muffler that we're going to be plumbing in. But if you still have stock exhaust on your Jeep and you want a little bump in performance, well, Gibson has a catback system you might be interested in. To make a little extra room for our muffler, I did have to move the charcoal canister a little bit closer to the drive shaft. It's not a big modification, just had to drill a couple of new holes through the cross members and add a through bolt. That created just enough room to sneak in our stainless steel Gibson muffler and clamp it in place.
Today, we're taking out our JK Wrangler to see how it performs with its newly swapped in Hemi V8 under the hood. Then it's back in the shop to upgrade the suspension, install a new front axle, and shoe it with some much better wheels and tires. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, our 5.7 Hemi swap and our 0.7 JK Wrangler is complete. All we've got left to do is charge up our AC system, and we'll be back to where we were when this thing still had a V6 in it. Except now, we've got 2 extra cylinders and a lot more horsepower and torque. Now, before we started the engine conversion and it still had the 3.8 in it, we threw it up on the scales to see what it would weigh. Then after the swap, and as it sits now, we threw it back on the scales. We started out with 3,917 pounds. After the swap, we went up to 4,139 pounds, meaning we picked up about 200 pounds of swap weight, which is no big deal. It's going to be more than offset by the big increase in horsepower and torque. Now, before we start throwing more parts at this thing, we wanted to see how a stock JK Wrangler on stock size tires would drive and handle with V8 power. Now, there's probably not that many people that would do a V8 swap in a Wrangler and not change anything else. But we wanted to do it just to have a back-to-back comparison and see what it would be like. And you guessed it, it was a lot more fun. I shouldn't be doing that in a short wheelbase Jeep. Our 0 to 60 test was also a lot better, going from about 10 seconds down to about 8.5. Much better than before. 60. Our 60 to 0 braking test was about the same as stock, although we did notice a little bit of extra weight over the front end. And after using the brakes hard, we noticed a shimmy in the left front under hard braking. In our case, it was caused by a dragging caliper that was causing excessive heat buildup in the rotor, causing it to warp. But we can fix that too, as soon as we get back to the shop. Now, as fun as our Hemi JK is, well, it's not about straight line performance with this Jeep. And it's not that impressive with those little tires on it. So a little suspension teardown was in order so we could make room for some larger and more aggressive wheels and tires, something we can take off-road. So we removed the track bar, sway bar end links, shocks, coil springs, and lower control arms. Up front, it's more of the same, except this time we're prepping the axle for complete removal. Now, normally you wouldn't do this just to install a lift kit, but we've got an upgrade in mind for the front end of this thing. Now, the Dana 30 is going away, and once we get it on jack stands, then we can get the Jeep back up in the air again and remove the factory control arms. They are not going to be reused. And when it came time to picking out a suspension system for our JK, we obviously wanted to create some room for some larger and more aggressive wheels and tires. But we also needed to create some clearance so the front diff didn't crash into the engine mount every time we hit a bump. Now, we've used lift kits from Rusty's Off-Road in the past, but this time Rusty delivered it himself. What'd you bring us?
Ryan, what I brought was our 3 1/4 advanced kit with our RX 300 upgraded shocks. Now on the control arms of the kit, it comes with the massive 2-inch tubing, rubber clevite bushings on one end, forged flex joints on the other end that are adjustable and that are totally rebuildable. On the rear, we use an adjustable arm with clevite rubber bushings on this end with a forged rubber adjustable end on this end.
Now, some of the other parts in the kit are extended length rear sway bar links, forged sway bar disconnects for the front. We've shown you in the past, and they're height adjustable. We've also got 4 extended length heavy duty stainless steel braided brake hoses and some heavy duty track bars for both the front and rear. Now, the advanced kit typically ships with standard hydraulic shocks, but we went for an upgrade to the RX 300 series shocks.
Ryan, the RX 300 is a monotube shock. It also comes with a remote reservoir, carries more fluid capacity and more oil for better heat displacement. Comes with billet end caps on both ends to really secure the bushings in place and be able to take this shock and put it on the JK and really take it out on the trail and really use it hard, and this shock will not fade.
Now, the last piece of the puzzle is the springs. These are 3 1/4-inch lift springs for all 4 corners, and it'll give us enough room to clear 35-inch tires. Now, all the parts on the table are made right here in the USA. In fact, the majority of them are manufactured right at Rusty's facility.
One of the things I'm most proud of is our design and in-house fabrication to make all these parts. We have our in-house laser, we have in-house press brakes, our in-house robot. We have some very talented people that run and operate these, and we're able to build and fabricate all our steel products, all our bumpers, our armor and rocker protection, and one of the big benefits of that is being able to keep things in stock at all times. If we do happen to run out within one day, we can usually have that part built, cut, fabricated, and powder coated and out the door within a couple of days at the very most. It's all done in-house and made in the United States.
All right, well, I'm going to get the suspension system installed, and maybe once the Jeep's all loaded down with parts and ready to go, we can meet up on some non-paved road and give these parts a little bit of a workout.
Sounds good to me.
All right, here's the plan.
Okay.
Up next, we'll get our new suspension installed. And later, it's time for a new Dana 44 up front. Stick around.
And a major improvement over stock. Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech, where we're doing some suspension upgrades on our 07 JK Wrangler. Now, the last piece of the stock suspension to go is the lower control arm. It's going to be replaced with a much stronger version. That's not only adjustable, but will also withstand much more abuse off-road. The adjustments will allow you to dial in your pinion angle. I'm also leaving the bushing a little bit loose until we get it on the ground. Next up is the rear coil spring. After squeezing it in place, apply a little bit of pressure on the jack to make sure it stays put and to allow me to attach the sway bar end links. The sway bar end links are adjustable for different lift heights. We'll follow that up with the installation of these extra fluid capacity remote reservoir shocks. We've got a good spot for these canisters over here. Next up is our heavy-duty adjustable rear track bar, which is a snug fit in the stock track bar bracket. So a little persuasion with a rubber mallet will line things up. Now we've got the remote reservoirs for the shocks mounted right here where the muffler used to be. We've got them strapped to the rear sway bar using the provided clamps. And to make sure the hydraulic hose that connects the shock to the reservoir doesn't touch the exhaust, well, we just took advantage of one of the mounting studs for the heat shield. And the last thing we got to do to finish up the rear suspension is install these Crown Performance extended rear brake lines. Now these extended brake lines are necessary because the axle is going to be farther away from the frame. And that's just at ride height. When you flex it out, it's going to get even farther away. And if you left the stock brake lines in place, well, they'd be pulled tight. You run the risk of damage and possible brake failure. Not what you want. So these stainless steel extended lines solve that problem. And there's no need to over tighten the connection either. Just a good snug fit is all you really need. Don't forget the copper washers that go on either side of the connection at the caliper. With the rear suspension done, we can move on to the front, which replaces the stock 4 control arm setup with a Rusty's designed radius arm style control arm. Now earlier, when we installed the rear sway bar end links, we did it with the rod end facing out. But after looking at it a little while, we thought it might be close to the tire sidewall. So we simply flipped it around to get a little bit more clearance. It's not going to change the way the end link works, it's just going to give us more room.
After the break, we're prepping our new front axle. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. We're in the middle of installing a Rusty's off-road lift kit on our JK Wrangler. And with the shocks installed, we can add the sway bar disconnects. Now, as you probably know, the purpose of the sway bar disconnect is to disconnect the front sway bar or anti-roll bar from the rest of the suspension, allowing for more suspension travel. Track bar. This part, just like the majority of them, reuses the original hardware, so keep track of all the bolts during teardown. Leave that loose till we get the axle centered. All right, now for a front axle on our Wrangler, we knew an upgrade would be necessary. If we were just running 35-inch tires and a stock drivetrain, we might be able to get away with running the stock Dana 30 front end. But even then, we'd be pushing it because these are known to have a few weak spots. And our JK, well, it's got a healthy V8 and already weighs in at well over 4,000 pounds, so we knew an upgrade would be needed. So when Rusty bought up the suspension system, well, he also dragged up this bare Pro Rock 44 housing that he sells. And it addresses all the weaknesses found in the stock housing. This Dana 44 axle has 3-inch diameter, half-inch thick axle tubes, which is much stronger than the much smaller 1/4-inch thick axle tubes on the factory housing, which are known to bend. What's also known to bend is the end forgings or inner Cs. This, very thick, lots of material. The stock version, well, you can see why it bends. In addition to that, well, all the control arm and shock mount bracketry is 1/4-inch thick and a major improvement over stock. The diff housing itself is a high clearance housing that'll glide over rocks, and it offers up just as much ground clearance as the weaker Dana 30 axle. Now obviously this is an empty housing that's going to have to be filled with a 456 ring and pinion from Motive Gear, a selectable locker, and some 10 factory axle shafts, but that'll have to be another day. For now, well, at least the stock knuckles and brakes swap over to this housing so we can get it installed. Now we do plan on a brake system upgrade. But for the purpose of getting the Jeep back down on all fours, we're going to reuse the stock parts for now. The axle shafts and unit bearing come out as an assembly. Now the tapered tie rod end was spinning in the bore on the knuckle, but the stud will accept a hex socket so you can prevent that from happening and remove the lock nut. And like we told you, the steering knuckles get reused. But old parts against new parts, well, they just look bad. So a quick coat of black paint brings the old stuff up to par. The stock axle shafts will not be reused. They're not the right size and they're not strong enough. But I'm not sure if the JK unit bearings are like the older Jeep unit bearings, where the axle shaft has to be installed to keep the bearing together and prevent it from falling apart with weight on it. So we're playing it safe and running with the axle shafts installed for now. We'll swap them out when we get our new pieces. All right, now we've got our axle installed. And once we get the Jeep back down on the ground, we can use our adjustable track bar to center the axle up. You want equal amounts of tire stick out on both sides. We can also use our adjustable upper control arms to dial in the pinion angle and the caster that we need here at the wheel. Now, this axle housing's got extra caster built into it, so you can get the pinion angle you need in a lifted application, but still have good street manners with the correct amount of caster. And once I install this last brake line, we can set this thing down on the ground. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, with the lift kit complete and the Jeep back down on all fours, well, the stock size tires look puny in the wheel wells. So let's fix that and throw some 35-inch Mickey Thompsons on here. The tires we picked out are 305/70/17 Baja MTZ radials. It's the metric equivalent to a 35/12/50. All right. Dragster style? Yeah, I didn't think so either. The wheels we've got those tires wrapped around are Mickey Thompson Side Biter 2s in a 17/9 size with 4.5 inches of back spacing. The aluminum wheels look good and they've reduced rotating mass and unsprung weight. Now the tires look good, the black wheels look good against our silver and black Jeep, and this thing's looking proportional with the 35s on it. We didn't make it too big. This is something you could definitely drive every day. Now, if you stand back and look at it, it looks like the front might be sitting a little bit low compared to the rear. It's probably because of the extra couple of 100 pounds of Hemi V8 swap weight. But before we do anything about it, we're gonna get a spare tire carrier on here and see if a heavy tire and wheel hanging off the back levels things out. If it doesn't, well, the solution is simple. A little spring spacer will fix things right up. But with a Hemi swap, 35s and a lift kit, well, this is the Jeep you should be able to go down to the dealership and buy. They should have made this way from the factory. Now, all we got to do is something about all this plastic everywhere.
Today, we're back on our 07 Hemi swapped JK. We're adding rocker protection, new fender flares, a winch, new bumpers, a tire carrier, and making a big upgrade in braking performance. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today, we're working on our 07 Jeep Wrangler, our Hemi swapped JK. And this thing's turning into quite the dual-purpose street and trail rig. So far, we've swapped in the aforementioned 5.7-liter V8. It's got a heavy-duty aftermarket Dana 44 front axle. The rear axle is a factory Dana 44. It's got a 3.25-inch lift kit and sitting on some 35-inch tires. But we've still got some work to do. The front bumper is plastic. Not exactly the best spot for a winch, and it's not going to offer up much protection. These plastic side steps, same story. They're not going to offer up much protection. So we're going to replace those plastic parts with some steel versions, something that will protect the body. This is a nice, clean, straight Jeep. We want to keep it that way. So today we're going to add a couple of bumpers, some rocker protection, a winch, a tire carrier, and we've got a big brake kit to go on all four corners. But the first thing we're going to do, swap out these fender flares. After removing a few bolts and disconnecting the wiring harness for the light, you can start prying the flare away from the body. Just make sure you get every bolt. I kind of forgot one. Now the popping noises you hear when pulling the flare off is the factory retainer clips breaking. No big deal, they're not reused. It just sounds wrong. And any leftover broken clips left in the holes need to be removed.
Now we're going to be replacing the factory flares with these flat style fender flares that we picked up from Bushwhacker, but it looks like they might occupy the same real estate as the steel rocker protection that we picked up from Rusty's. Since plastic is easier to trim than metal, well, we're going to install the rocker protection first, just trim the flares to fit. Our new rocker protection is going to cover up the majority of the Wrangler sticker on the side of the Jeep. So we're going to go ahead and remove it with the help of a little bit of heat. It softens up both the adhesive and the sticker, making removal a little bit easier. Now to get rid of any leftover adhesive stuck to the body, a little bit of WD-40 on a rag takes care of that. After mocking up the rocker protection and locking it in place where we want it, we can go ahead and mark the holes that need to be drilled. The holes that are accessible on the back side of the sheet metal will get a through bolt, a nut and bolt. The ones on the back side of the tub is going to get a bolt and a threaded insert into the body. The inserts and the special tool needed both come in the kit. It's basically a threaded rivet, and by tightening the bolt down, it's causing the insert to clamp down around the surrounding sheet metal, leaving a nice new bolt hole. Now the rocker protection is going to leave some silver painted sheet metal exposed on the bottom. So we're going to paint the bottom few inches of the tub with a black wrinkle spray paint from Duplicolor. That'll help the rockers blend in nicely. Before laying down the paint, we had to do a little bit of prep work. So we gave the surface a little bit of tooth by using a red scuffing pad and then wiped everything down with some prep spray and a Scott Pro shop towel. Then we could go at it with the paint. Now this does take a few different layers. They recommend going in 3 different directions with 3 medium coats. This stuff does take a while to dry. They recommend 24 hours, but we're cheating a little bit and force drying it with a heat gun. And it's cool to see the texture pop right out of the paint. And if you do happen to get a little bit of overspray on the body, well, cleanup's pretty easy. Then it's simple as bolting the rocker protection into place. Now the fasteners are stainless steel, so a little anti-seize will prevent thread galling. With that done, we can move on and finish up the fender flare installation. Starting with reinstalling the original splash shield. It's going to get trimmed and reused, basically marking it flush with the body. If it sticks out too much, the outer flare won't go on. If it doesn't stick out enough, well, it won't tuck behind the new fender flare. We're using our Matco air saw to make quick work of the excess plastic. Then you can install the Bushwhacker inner fender pieces. They get fastened down using the holes that the plastic retainer clips came popping and cracking out of. You don't want to tighten down the bolts too much. It'll deform the plastic. And you want the inner fender pieces to ride along the body line of the fender. Then you can reinstall the trimmed inner splash shield and cut off the connector to the factory marker light and add on a couple of the connectors supplied in the kit. And like we told you earlier, we're gonna have to trim the flares to fit around our steel rockers. So after marking it, we use our air saw to trim away about 1/4 inch of plastic. Then we added the rubber trim that goes in between the flare and the body for a nice finished look. Then you can plug in the wiring for the new marker light. And it's a good idea to test to make sure it works before fully committing to the installation. If need be, just swap the wires around. Then, using the supplied screws, simply attach the flare to the inner pieces. Now, where we had to cut the fender flare to fit around the rocker protection turned out pretty good, especially once we added the rubber trim. And the last step is pulling off this liner so the rest of the rubber trim sticks to the fender.
Up next, we'll get our new winch and bumpers installed.
There we go.
And later, we're stepping up to 13.5-inch rotors. Stay tuned.
Quite the difference. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now we've had a chance to install our Bushwhacker flat style flares at all four corners, and we swapped out the plastic side steps for some steel rocker protection on both sides. But now we're ready to throw a few more parts at this thing, make it a little bit more ready for the trail. Now, like we mentioned earlier, we want to add a winch to the front of our Jeep, but that plastic street-friendly bumper isn't the place to do it. We wanted a steel bumper and something with a lot of clearance. So we checked out the latest offerings from Mickey Thompson and their Metal Series line of bumpers just for the JK Wranglers. And these are modular line of bumpers. Now the center section is obviously the main section, and it features heavy-duty D-ring tabs, it's powder-coated black, and holds the optional winch tray. Now there's also 3 different options for end caps. There's a flush end cap that, as you guessed it, fits almost flush with the center section. There's a stubby end cap and a full-length end cap that more closely mimics the stock bumper. And the stubby and the full-length caps feature rock light ports in case you want to do a little night riding and need to see obstacles a little bit better. There's also 2 options for winch guards, the low guard, what we went with, and the stinger. Speaking of winches, check out this Warn Xeon 8S, meaning it's got an 8,000-pound single pull rating, and the S signifying that it uses synthetic winch rope instead of steel cable. And with that rope, well, you need to use a polished aluminum Haas fairlead instead of a roller fairlead, which would tear up the synthetic rope. Now, this is a low-profile design winch, but you can make it even better by moving this control pack elsewhere on the vehicle to lower the profile even more and maximize airflow into the grill, and hopefully keeping our V8 cool. Now, the plastic factory bumper really isn't a bad idea if you're only going to be using your Jeep on the street. It's light, and less weight equals better fuel economy, so I can see why they do it. But if you're going to be using your Jeep off-road, well, something a little bit more substantial is probably in the cards for you. Step 1 of the installation is installing these nut plates into the pockets on both frame ends. That'll provide a mounting location for the winch tray. Now, I'm running a couple of bolts in from the front just to help locate and index the winch tray until we tighten down the side bolts. Then we can remove our indexing bolts. We follow that with the installation of our new winch, which sits in the bumper or winch tray really nicely. Then we tighten down the hardware that was supplied with the winch. Then we can wrap it in a bumper. Now, I'm using our Cundle crane to help position the bumper, but it's really not that heavy, so if you've got a friend, it's pretty manageable to line things up and get it bolted in place. Now, all the hardware is supplied in the kit, and it's all good grade 8 quality hardware. Just make sure you position the bumper where you want it before you tighten down any of the bolts. All right, now the only thing we've got left to do to finish up the installation of the winch is to make our power and ground connections directly to the battery. Now the winch sits nice and low in the bumper. I like that a lot. It doesn't look like it's going to impede airflow at all, even without relocating that control pack. And the stubby end caps on the bumper will allow the tire to roll up to an obstacle without the end caps of the bumper getting in the way. It's nice to have on the trail. Now the rear bumper is a Mickey Thompson Metal Series bumper as well. And just like the front, it's got rock light ports on either end of it. It's also designed and engineered to work with the OEM receiver hitch. We also went with the optional swing-out spare tire carrier. It'll give us a solid and sturdy mounting location for our relatively heavy 35-inch spare tire. The rear bumper, just like the front, comes off with just a few bolts. Then we can get a couple of the supporting brackets out of the way, along with the factory spare tire and the spare tire carrier. Now the third brake light assembly needs to be kept. It gets reused on the extended third brake light portion of the new tire carrier. Magnesium. Next, we're installing the rear bumper brackets. Now the bolts that thread into the side of the frame are only getting snugged down for now. This template will help us line up and drill the holes along the bottom of the frame. I've got it clamped into position so it doesn't move around on me. Then it's time to drill 3 holes. I'm starting out with a 1/4-inch drill bit and working my way up to 5/8. Our Ken Cut drill bits make quick work of a rather labor-intensive task. A little spray paint on the exposed metal will keep corrosion at bay. And with that knocked out, then we can install the rear bumper bracket for good, along with the spare tire carrier support bracket. And with both sides done, it's time to hang the bumper. There we go. And once you've got the bumper lined up with the body lines, you can tighten down all the bumper bolts. And add the spare tire carrier. That's super tight. Then we bolt on the door plate and rubber bumpers into the factory tire carrier location.
After the break. Oh, wait, brakes are actually after the break. Yeah, that's right, stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, the installation of our rear bumper and tire carrier is complete. You've got the spare hanging off of it, the third brake light is relocated, wired up, and working. But one thing we hadn't talked about was the high lift jack mount that we picked up with our tire carrier. It provides a convenient mounting location for something that's almost an off-road necessity. And despite all the extra weight hanging off this thing, the swing out function looks nice and smooth. Now, like we mentioned earlier, we've got a brake upgrade plan for this Jeep. And it only makes sense. We've added a lot of horsepower, a few hundred pounds worth of body protection and heavy-duty parts, not to mention the extra rotating mass of the larger 35-inch tires. But it's not a simple brake pad and rotor upgrade this time. We wanted a serious improvement, so we went with a big brake kit for all four corners from Bear. We picked up our 13.5-inch Pro front brake kit from Rusty's Off-Road Products. It's obviously a 13.5-inch rotor. It's drilled, slotted, and zinc-plated. The front calipers are massive. They're good-looking 6-piston calipers, and these are a serious improvement over the stock hardware, and everything's designed to bolt right to the JK spindle. The rear kit is their S4 kit. Uses a 4-piston caliper, and it's engineered and designed to work with the factory parking brake assembly. Now, when doing an installation like this, well, it's always a good idea to make sure you test fit your parts. Once you install them, you own them. Now, the minimum wheel size for this big brake kit is 17 inches, and they're designed to work with most aftermarket versions. Ours? Yeah, they fit without any problem. We're in good shape. Now, the factory JK brakes aren't bad, but there's definitely room for improvement. And the last guy that worked on this thing put some anti-seize in between the rotor and the hub mating surface. That's part of the reason it came apart so easily. And when installing new rotors, it's always a good idea to make sure the mating flange is good and clean so the rotor sits nice and flat. That'll prevent any unwanted rotor runout or shimmy. Now, the bolts holding the caliper brackets in place got treated to a little medium strength Loctite. Torquing these to the recommended 120 foot-pounds. This ring here is supplied in the kit, and it's what locates or centers the rotor on the hub. And again, a little bit of anti-seize, make sure disassembly happens without much trouble. Now, time for the big rotor. Shiny red caliper. And if you're trying to match your calipers to an accent color on your vehicle, well, Bear offers over a dozen colors so you can find something that matches. And don't forget the copper seal rings that go in between the banjo bolt and your existing brake line. Done. Stock versus the 13.5-inch replacement. Quite the difference. Hey guys, welcome back. And we've got our Bear brakes installed at all four corners, and they look really good behind the spokes of our Mickey Thompson wheels. Now, the rear brakes went on just like the fronts, the only difference being a small amount of trimming to the rear dust shield for caliper bracket clearance. Now, once we get the brakes bled, we've got a pretty comprehensive rotor seasoning and brake pad bedding procedure to follow, just to make sure we get everything out of our new brakes that we should. Once we're done with that, we should be experiencing a pretty substantial improvement in braking ability for this 4,000+ pound Jeep. Now, with the fender flares on here, winch, bumpers, and side protection on, well, we're just about at the finish line for this Jeep and all the parts we've been throwing at it. But we've got a few more left. Our Dana 44 up front is empty, so we're going to be filling it with an air locker and 456 gears. Now, the factory 44, well, it's not empty, but it's getting the same air locker and matching gears. We've also got a couple of installation kits, a high output air compressor, and a heavy duty diff cover to throw at this thing. Once these parts are on, well, we can finally take our modified Hemi-powered JK out and see how it performs on the street in some pretty tough trails. We got some work to do.
Today, we're finishing up our JK Wrangler with new axle shafts and locking diffs. Then, we're hitting the street and the trails to see how well all our hard work will pay off. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Today, we are finishing up our 07 Jeep Wrangler. You guys that have been keeping up with the show know we've already swapped in a 5.7 liter Hemi and matching automatic transmission, added a 3¼ inch lift kit from Rusty's Off-Road, big brakes at all four corners, swapped in a heavy-duty Dana 44 front axle, added bumpers, winch, tire carrier, and rocker protection. And I'm in the process of swapping in gears and locking differentials. Now, once we get done with all this stuff, we get to get out of the shop for a little bit and test this thing out off-road and see how it does. But clearly, we got some labor to take care of first, so let's get this rear axle knocked out. Now, an air locker requires compressed air so it can function correctly and lock and unlock. So we've got to get compressed air to this copper feed line. That means we've got to drill and tap the axle housing so we can get that done. Now, the diff and our 456 motive gears have already been installed and set up. We've got a good contact pattern as well. All we've got to do is take care of the plumbing.
Good thing this iron's fairly soft. All right, we should be close, yep.
Now, drilling and tapping an axle housing can seem a little intimidating. But if you take your time and just go step by step, you can get the job done right the first time.
I went ahead and applied some Loctite thread sealant to the pipe threads, so it's good to go. Just good and snug is all it needs.
Before disassembly, I marked the bearing caps because they need to go back in the same position.
Yeah, my dots lining up with my dots. You can see here, I had to make a notch to clear the copper line.
After torquing the bearing cap bolts to 85 foot-pounds, we can form the airline and trim it to length. Now to trim it, I'm using our tubing cutter. The copper O-ring is sealed to the diff housing or bulkhead fitting with this O-ring. And since the O-ring is what does the sealing, well, the fitting doesn't need to be super tight. You don't want to crush that O-ring.
Snug.
And with the copper line secured, you can get to work routing the airline. You want it to have plenty of room around the ring gear and keep it close to the diff housing as possible. That way it doesn't get caught up in any moving parts.
All right, we're good.
Now for rear axle shafts, we could reinstall the stock pieces. They'd bolt right up. And it's a decent axle shaft. It's good size diameter, 30 spline, and I'm sure it would be okay behind our Hemi-powered Wrangler. But we're more than likely on the ragged edge of what a stock axle shaft can take. So while we got everything apart, we're going to take the opportunity to upgrade to these 10 factory shafts. These are 4140 chromoly axles that we picked up from Rusty's. Now they feature rolled splines and a Duracoat finish to fend off corrosion. The kit includes ABS tone rings, axle seals, bearings, and press and wheel studs. So that means we got a little bit of work to do at our big old hydraulic press. The first piece to go on is the ABS tone ring. It's one of the pieces that provide the wheel speed signal to the vehicle's electronics. Now, I like to keep old bearing races just for pressing on parts like these. To press the wheel studs in, I'm using an unused shock sleeve insert. It's just a little bit longer than the wheel studs, and it does a good job of pressing the studs in good and straight. Now you can hammer these studs in, I've seen it done and I've done it myself, but they're usually not perfectly straight when you choose that method. So pressing them in or paying somebody else to is a good idea.
Careful with the ABS sensor there.
Now with the engine swap moving the location of our transfer case, we had to buy new drive shafts. but we've showed you guys that the factory JK shafts aren't the strongest things in the world. So with a V8 under the hood and 35-inch tires, a shaft upgrade only makes sense. So a quick call to Tom Wood's Custom Drive Shafts netted us these polished and clear-coated bad boys. Now, the JK drive shaft kits include flanges for both the transfer case and the axle end to replace the factory-style flange. And when Tom heard we were running a V8, well, he recommended an upgrade to the 1350 series joints. When compared to the 1310 joints that normally come in these, well, you can see which one is stronger. And with those 1350s installed in these shafts, well, they're about the strongest drive shafts you can get for a JK.
To get the factory transfer case flange out of the way, first we remove the retaining nut and then use our matte coat 2-jaw puller to make quick work of it.
That was easy, wasn't under much tension.
Before installing the flange, I applied a thin film of RTV to the splines and some thread locker to the retaining nut. Then we just ran it in with our impact gun. With that done, we can install the drive shaft.
Now, the heavy-duty chromoly inner and outer front axle shafts came from 10 Factory as well. And the kit includes quality Spicer U-joints. And after some quick assembly, well, they'll be ready for installation and they'll complete our front axle.
These full circle retainers that are provided in the kit do a better job of retaining the U-joint caps than the 3/4 C-clips that are often used. Under high stress situations, well, parts can move around a little bit, those C-clips can get spit out, and you have part failure. These full circle retainers go a long way in preventing that from happening.
All right.
Then we can install our heavy-duty shafts, being careful not to damage the seal, add the hubs or wheel bearings, brakes, and that'll just about button up this front end.
All right, with the diff set up, the axle shafts, and the drive shafts installed, well, I'm using our Motive Products Power Fill to give our 456 Motive gears a bath in gear oil. Then all I've got to do to finish things up is install the air compressor and route the air lines. Then we'll be ready to take our Hemi-powered Wrangler out and see how it does off-road and maybe on the street too.
After the break, we're finally getting out of the shop and hitting the trails to have a little fun. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Well, we're finally out of the shop and down here at Wooley's Off-Road Park, one of our favorite places to come ride. Now, if you guys remember when we were installing our lift kit, well, we had Rusty in the shop and we told you we might meet back up with him on the trail to test these things out. So that's who's behind us, and it's almost brand new 4-door, so let's go have some fun. Now, Rusty's rig for today is this 2013 4-door, and he's rolling on 37-inch tires and one of his 5.5-inch long arm kits with the RX 200 series shocks. He's also got some side protection, bumpers, and a winch, so he should be in good shape for the day. And it'll be a good comparison to our 2-door JK with a 3.25-inch advanced kit on it. Now, like we mentioned, this Jeep's got Rusty's long arm suspension on it, where our Jeep has the control arms mounted in the factory locations. So he's probably gonna have a little bit more axle flex. But we've got air lockers where he's got open diffs, so it'll be interesting to compare the two going down the trail. That works too. Now, without locking differentials, Rusty's gonna have to use a little bit more momentum to get over some of the obstacles down here at Wooley's.
It's basically a stock vehicle that we've brought out here with just our suspension kit, tires and wheels, and it's performed really good.
All right, you're about to fall off. Yep, keep coming.
Most people think a long arm kit is just for aggressive off-roading, and it's not.
All right, just back up about 6 inches and just give it a little bump.
It's just as much for highway and on-road driving as it is off-road.
Don't go back far, just a little, that's good. Now just try to give it a little bump.
Well, this kit, it being a 3.25 advance, a lot of people don't want to do any cutting or modification to the vehicle. With the long arm kit, it's a bolt-on kit. There's no welding, but it does require removing the factory hanger brackets. It's a lot more adjustable than, say, a short arm kit. It cuts a lot of the more severe angles out of the suspension to give it much better ride and handling over a short arm kit.
Now for that front locker. These JKs are about 5 inches wider than the TJ. Feels like the front end's a little bit light. Now might be a good time for an oil change. Convenient anyway.
Now come straight at me.
Here's a great example of how a locker can keep you moving forward on a trail, even with some air under one tire. The shorter two doors, a little easier to navigate. At least when moving forward. Time to look at our options here. I heard plastic crunching. Oh yeah, Rusty, you sell replacement top parts? I think we got a couple of victims here. Oh, we kind of broke the B-pillar post here, but it happens. Now what can you do? Well, I don't see that stump moving on its own. I'm pretty sure this piece here goes here in the B-pillar, but it doesn't seem to want to stay. Stupid stump. Now we built this thing to be able to drive it to the trails, tackle some pretty aggressive terrain, and then drive back home without the assistance of a separate truck and trailer. So this is about as hardcore as we want to get, because we got to rely on this thing to get us back to the shop.
I'm just worried about that corner.
That's good. Yep, still running. Look at me, I'm a videographer, shooting the shooter. Now the mild lift kit, locking diffs, and body armor proved to be a pretty capable combination on our two-door Wrangler. But Rusty's four-door proves that you can take a basically stock vehicle, throw a long arm kit on it and some decent tires, and it'll take you pretty far up the trail. Now instead of installing limited slips or locking diffs, vehicle manufacturers are more reliant than ever on electronic traction control. While that might be okay if you're serious about wheeling, you're gonna need a locker or two.
Up next, we'll see just how well our JK behaves on pavement. Then it's back to Woolies for some more off-road fun. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Well, we're taking a break from the dirt trails of Woolies for a little bit of pavement. Now, out on the highway, this thing's doing great. We're cruising at 70, 72 miles an hour. It's running cool. There's no steering wheel shimmy or shake. Nice daily driver. This Jeep is truly a dual-purpose rig. And with the Hemi under the hood, it just makes it more fun to drive every day. Now, I've done quite a few miles behind the wheel of lifted Jeeps, mostly powered by a 4-liter straight 6, and it's a great engine. It's one of my favorites. It seems to last forever. But having a 5.7 Hemi on the hood, well, sure makes it nice. Put that right foot down. This thing sounds good, man. This thing sounds really good. Now, like we talked about, we want to be able to use this Jeep on some pretty tough trails and out on the highway, so we didn't want to get too carried away with tire size. The more you set a vehicle up for hardcore off-road use, the less usable it is out on the open road. So we tried to find a good balance between the two. Now these 35s are riding pretty good. They do make a little bit of noise, but it's what you would expect from a mud tire. It's definitely not too bad. And like you guys saw out at Woolies, our suspension system performed well on the trails, and it's riding great out on the highway. And with the selectable locking differentials front and rear, it allows this Wrangler to perform really well in both arenas. And our Bear brake kit is doing a great job of slowing down our about 4,500-pound rig.
Oh, that's awesome. Look at that.
So now that we've proved this Jeep Wrangler does great out on the pavement, let's head back to Woolies Off-Road Park and see what we can do about a highlight reel.
Yeah, and get it over.
bypass. At least if I roll, I'm not going far. Now, all in all, today was a good day. Rusty's longer four-door Jeep did great out on the trail. I think the extra suspension flex from the long arm kit kept the tires in contact with the trail and kept him moving. I think he survived the day without any damage. Our locked-up two-door Jeep performed really well too. In fact, the only damage we incurred was this flimsy piece of black plastic that goes on the B-pillar. But that's what they make parts for. It's not too expensive. No big deal. Hey guys, welcome back. Well, after a full day out on the trail testing out our 07 Jeep Wrangler, it just about puts this project to bed. And we did just about everything you can do to a Jeep to this one. We did the 5.7 Hemi swap, heavy-duty front axle, gears, lockers, axle shafts, lift kit, tires, wheels, bumper, winch, rocker protection, and tire carrier. Just about everything, and everything performed like it was supposed to. Now, just like always, we come prepared. We bring tools and extra fluids out here on the trail. But we also packed along the extra air locker line that came in the installation kit, along with a couple of the repair unions, so you can make a trail fix. If you happen to crush one of these lines on the trail or burn it on the exhaust, well, your air lockers aren't going to work. You're going to be stuck with open diffs, basically. So take one of these kits along, be prepared, and keep rolling on the trail. But for now, I'm going to head back to the shop and start thinking about a new project.